All right. Name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined for tonight's debate breakdown, not for the first or 10th time. People know who this is, by the People's Econ Prof, Rob Larson. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm really good, Ben. It's exciting to be here. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah. So before we start talking about the debate, I did just want to briefly note, just because it's what I'd been looking at just before I drove over to the studio to do this. Um, have you seen tonight's news about our president?
Well, I know a little bit before I got ready to do this. I was seeing that he's exonerated of the documents hoarding charges. I don't think we need to explore it any further than that. The point is, his exoneration. There's no need for us to discuss the reason why.
Yeah. This is,
Fine.
this maybe seems not great to me, just considering that this is the American presidency is like an objectively obscene amount of power, like more power than any human being should be trusted to have at the best of circumstances. And the stated reason for his exoneration is that he's clearly like cognitively declined so much that he legitimately doesn't remember the documents, because he also doesn't remember. He also had trouble remembering when exactly he was vice president. That was my favorite part.
Yeah, and even like the sweet stuff, like his late beloved son, unable to recall just like the basics of that. Like, oh, I don't know. Like, it's nice to have more vindication that Biden shouldn't be running. On the other hand, like that's rather sad.
No, it's extremely sad. I mean, like I actually, just kind of take it as a random human being. I actually feel really bad for him. It's sad to watch, but it's also just really striking to get this coming out just after he, uh, dispatched the token opposition in the renomination process. So it's like, oh, that's nice. This is the thing. This is what's standing between us and a second Trump presidency.
I know. Yeah, it's great that this comes out like when it's just too late to really do anything about it. Although I did see someone amusingly posting that if he were to drop out at some point because he has a health event or because some staffer does the right thing and gives Grandpa that little push by the stairs. I mean, unless that happens, people suggested he might drop out at the convention and maybe make space for a Whitmer or at least a Newsom. But a number of people I saw online were like, they would definitely put Clinton in if he dropped out. And I was like, fuck, they probably would.
Yeah. That is a grim thought. All right, so you're really worried that Trump might be president again. Who's the best person we could possibly run against Donald Trump? The person who did such a good job of it the last time.
She's shown she can do the job. I mean, the running part.
Yeah.
I mean, the part at the very end. I mean,
yeah. She, but she could basically go through, like the mechanics of running for president. Like she is able to do that. Yeah. I've said this on the show before, but like it is just a really fun fact. That a while back I got curious about this. And I looked up the last several leaders of the Soviet Union before Gorbachev, like because the last few before Gorby all died in office as I think what was widely perceived, not incorrectly, as very old men, sort of notoriously very old men, and they were all younger than Trump and Biden are now when they died in office.
It's a poorer country, I guess. Even super old for them doesn't quite reach our American. When we have old leaders, my God, you won't believe the incredible agedness. Yeah, those two, Clinton, even sweet Bernie, like they're all like really. They don't look good for 900 either. Like they're like.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like, yeah, and granted, Andropov and Brezhnev, right, had they'd gone through World War II in Russia. That ages a person, but even so, right, they were very old. This is, like 81 is very, very old. And I mean, like, look, I'm gonna be happy if I'm just like kicking
Oh,
around, playing in the garden with my grandchildren like Don Corleone, when I'm 81.
we should all be so lucky.
If I try to do this podcast when I'm 81, honestly, I think people should intervene. Be like, come, just let it go. Let it go.
I don't know. Maybe several of us will be in a little nursing community, and it's like, oh, it's their little activity. They have a room. The tablets aren't actually hooked up. It's fine. They're just. Uh, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Well, uh, back. Yeah. So what we're gonna watch tonight, from way back when Trump and Biden were middle aged, is the debate. Well, I think it's one of the debates. I actually think Galbraith might have come on a few times, but I'm not
Yeah, I think he
totally.
was a friend of the show.
Yeah. So this is John Kenneth Galbraith on William F. Buckley's firing line. And so just to like set us up here a little bit, right? Like, Galbraith is somebody, I think Buckley, people who are at all interested in this stuff basically know who that is, right? The sort of, Lex Luthor of modern American conservatism, founder of National Review magazine, and really the one of the main people who put his imprint on kind of the defining synthesis of libertarian economics and social traditionalism that becomes modern American conservatism. Um, you know, that's Buckley. Um, and to his credit, he had the show Fire in Line. We've watched other Fire in Lines on here before where he actually did routinely invite ideological opponents to come talk to him, which is something that, many of Buckley's successors, don't seem to lack the confidence to do.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're too cool to even need to. Like they just like you don't even need to talk to someone who doesn't
yeah,
agree with you. They don't need to.
yeah, exactly. But Galbraith was a very, very big deal at the time. But I feel like I see kind of 2024 references to him a little bit less, right? So you want to give us a little background on who he is and why he was such a big deal?
Yeah, man. Sure. I mean, Galbraith. J. Kenneth Galbraith here is kind of a really interesting figure. He's one of those really interesting long Cold War careers. He's a Harvard professor for 50 years, put out about 50 books, including a few novels, which is a hearty output. Uh, but also had this. Wrote a ton of columns. He was a very visible Cold War economist, mostly kind of a liberal. I would say Keynesian. People talk about him as post-Keynesian. Post-Keynesian, especially, is kind of a nebulous term, so debatable. Uh, he had a number of big government policy roles, especially around World War II. The one that is sort of remembered is he was in the OPA, the Office of Price Administration, which ran the comprehensive wartime price control regulation system, including rent controls and rationing and control over gasoline cards and all that stuff. He was a figure there for a number of years. Eventually got pushed out. The business community hated that program like fucking poison, and eventually they got him pushed out for being too much of a communist, which of course he was not. Typical mixed economy, Cold War supporting, liberal, but pro market, pro private property Keynesian. And so he had a long writing career after that. He was briefly in and out of some other government offices and stuff. Won like the Medal of Freedom, I think, and stuff like that. So it's a super establishmentarian Cold War liberal economist, probably who people would think of in that period as being like a liberal economist. Media visibility, real intellectual credibility, and living in an era where conservatives had enough balls to have someone on the show who might disagree with them about more than whether Trump is a king or a god king. Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I guess the two things I think about are one. frenemy of the show, Sohrab Ahmari, has in his book, and elsewhere, right, sort of talks about, um, sort of like talk in this positive way about some of Galbraith's economic ideas, because he sort of pines for a time when there was like a more stable social contract, and that kind of negotiated political exchange between workers and capitalists, that that represents, is sort of sees as a more reasonable, well-ordered society, than what we've got right now, but of course is also very distinct from, like, socialism, right? Not having class compromise, but just not having classes. Um, on the other hand, I have the other thing that I immediately think about, just because it made my fucking day when I got it, is I got after I wrote a article for Jacobin, like, last summer, fall, I don't remember, um, about Karl Marx, about Karl Marx's essay, The Duchess of Sutherland and Slavery, which is about the essentially the enclosures in Scotland, and I got a fan email about it from Galbraith's son, who's also an academic, and it was like, oh yeah, my dad had stuff like this, and he talked about this in his
Wow, you got
documentary.
contacted by J.K. Jr. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I loved it. It was, like I said, made my week.
It's funny.
But yeah, so I watched. I haven't seen this through, right? Like I poked around it a little bit,
Yeah.
just to kind of get a sense of it, and I think it's pretty wide ranging. Um, that, because yeah, I mean, Galbraith is a he's a um obviously the sort of at the core of everything, right? He's an economist, but he's a diplomat and other things. He's very critical of he's very critical of the new Reagan administration. This is 1981.
Nice.
When they're talking, and I think it's also what I watched looks like it might be a little funny on that, because I think that some of Buckley's thoughts about the Cold War, probably age very badly very quickly, right? From
Yeah.
after 1981.
In common, in common with a lot of his ideas, yes, that one aged very poorly. Yeah, that was such a. That'll be interesting, yeah, to see exactly what they think about the just then emerging neoliberalism of that administration. That'll be fun to see.
Well, let's get started.
John Kenneth Galbraith has written his memoirs, as everyone who reads knows. But since everyone who reads, in the confident conclusion Professor Galbraith excludes anyone who is conservative, those conservatives viewing this program are, by special request of our guest, advised that the book is called A Life in Our Times, that it is available at any bookstore for $16.95. Meanwhile, your host, in my characteristic attempt to be helpful, advises you that the same book could have been bought for $6.95, except that the Democratic Congresses that have made inflation during the past generation have been enacting policies recommended in Professor Galbraith's book. Still,
during the Nixon administration,
you should rush out to buy it now, because the trajectory of inflation is not easily collapsed, and one can only hope to make economic progress during those indecently short intervals between the publication of Professor Galbraith's books. This is his 21st book, but not on that account are we entitled to conclude that Professor Galbraith has reached maturity. He still rejoices in the old enthusiasms, the New Deal, price controls, high taxes, central economic control, the practice of laissez-faire only where communist expansionism has occurred. But he manages to say all these things and to describe his life and his collaborations and his collisions with its principal figures with such charm and self-satisfied glee that he carries us all along like traveling in a barge with vintage wines and vintage talk. So what does it matter if ahead of us are the Niagara Falls? Which, by way of specific information, would spill Professor Galbraith back into Canada, whence the plague arose. From studying agriculture there, he went to Berkeley, where he honed his superstitions, then to Washington, where he told us during the war how much we could pay for tomato ketchup, then to Fortune magazine, which will have to bear the historical responsibility for teaching him to write some of the most graceful language being written, then to Harvard to corrupt the youth and produce his formidably influential trilogy, The Affluent Society, The New Industrial State, and Economics and the Public Purpose. He was appointed ambassador to India, whereupon India engaged in a war, and is generally credited with masterminding the brilliant political campaigns of Adlai Stevenson, Eugene McCarthy, George McGovern, and Edward Kennedy. Our examiner is Mr. Arianaya, who will be introduced in due course. No subject is untouched in Mr. Galbraith's book, and so perforce one must be arbitrary. I think it useful given
Did just want to pause to note two things that jumped out at me from, well, we haven't finished the introduction yet, but from what we got in the introduction, which is that smarmy little reference to telling us how much we could pay for ketchup during World War II, which, you know, it's like, I don't know, man. That's you know, like there was a, like, Hitler, there was a war, like, you know, you gotta, like you're really complaining about this.
Yeah.
But
you know, it's an emergency. It was called the emergency price controls. Like that was the, you know, it's amazing now. People are like, oh, COVID, I had to wear a mask. Like in World War II, we had price controls and press censorship. Like people don't remember what emergency measures are.
yeah, no, that was an emergency. Yeah, if anything is. Also, I don't think people were clamoring to pay more for ketchup. So, you know, in any case, also, you know, like that little joke in passing about corrupting the youth at Harvard is like, okay, you can take that as like a little bit of a self-effacing joke also, that it's like, it's sort of like doing a, you know, little hyperbole. It's almost at his own expense, but it is interesting to remember, you know, for, you know, some reason I read Buckley's book, God and Man at Yale, and that's a very explicitly pro-censorship book, right? The whole point is that, you know, Yale, in that case, not Harvard, had but, you know, Yale is Buckley's alma mater, was you know, had like hired all of these socialists and atheists, and they should fire them all.
Yeah, that's very bold. Yeah, you know, at least he's just coming out and saying, yeah, fire them, you know, and overseas, kill the brutes. Like, I almost prefer that Winston Churchill level of just like naked imperialism and like raw power exercise. Like, yes, exclude those ideas. They threaten me in my position of wealth. Of course, I want them kept from young people. Like, I almost prefer that now. I mean, you know, these days, the successors of Buckley is like, oh, Hillary Clinton is a socialist and she, you know, drinks the blood of children, which is only half true.
Right,
It's
right.
like, it's like at least he's willing to say, oh, he writes very well. What an important person. Awful ideas, of course. Like, I'm not one of those socialists who pines for the Buckley era of civility, but you do notice, you know, it does take a little more just guts. Just the engagement part shows like a little bit more like confidence of his evil convictions than you get today.
Yeah.
Academic cleansing. We have really funny comments in the chat this time, people. Keep it going.
current controversy to discuss some of the implications of Mr. Reagan's economic proposals, and we'll begin by alluding to Mr. Galbraith's most recent writing, an essay in the New York Times Magazine on the uses and excuses for affluence. I should like to begin by asking Mr. Galbraith to explain why he wants to tax at 70% or more the savings of people who invested their money in savings accounts, say.
Well, people who are in the 70% bracket are not heavy users of savings accounts. So along with the
Well, that's how they got into that bracket, by saving.
So along with the charming and rather massive amount of misinformation in that introduction, omits to tell about Buckley and the Reagan thrust back to the 18th century. I make no apologies for being for having accepted the world of the New Deal. And you do, don't you, Bill? Do you accept the New Deal as a historic event, or one to be, in the best Buckley manner, reversed?
Well, I'm glad you're defensive about it. It is.
Well, I'm not
there's a lot to be
defensive at all.
defensive. I think there's a lot to be defensive about a society that fought its way clear of the tyrannies of George III, which I think most people would welcome in return for those being exercised by Washington today.
You are not pre-George III. That's the first time I ever heard that. My God.
No, I would have joined in that revolution for the same reason that I would oppose the New Deal.
You're moving on all the time, aren't you?
But now, are you through with the New Deal, or shall I rub it in?
But to get back to the tax system, certainly I regard the income tax, enacted incidentally by Republicans, William Howard Taft, as one of the great progressive instruments of our time, and something with an enormously conservative effect. The reason being that if you leave the system to the kind of unbridled free enterprise which you and Ronald Reagan and Mr. Reagan and company would like, then you're going to have a depth of anger and dissatisfaction that, among other things, has no conservative value or effect.
Well, the amount of dissatisfaction and irrationality that prevailed during the late 60s and early 70s had nothing to do with anything with which I have any sympathy. I don't even believe in civil disobedience. Except when somebody gets in the way of my rights of conscience.
So you would agree with me that
Taft, you have to admit, A, had nothing to do with the passage of the amendment. He happened simply to be president at the time.
But you would agree with me, wouldn't you, then, that a certain sense of equality and a sense of fairness in the society is a great source of social tranquility, and something which you, as a conservative, would wish to have me as a liberal advocate.
I think it's contra naturam. I think what everybody requires and is entitled to is the opportunity to use.
Do just want to pause to note that it's always an interesting sign when people feel the need to slip into Latin to say these things, right? So that my Latin doubtless is not as good as Bill Buckley's. But that contrary to nature, right? That's what he just said. That that a sense of equality and fairness is contrary to nature.
I see. That sounds like what he would believe. Yeah, I only have Economist Latin myself, so it's not much. Yeah, that is their kind of view. Like, oh, it's nice, but it's not natural. Yeah.
Anybody who actually knows Latin in the chat, please correct me, but that's what it sounded like.
Yeah, if John Cleese from Life of Brian is in the chat, please help us. But yeah, that's that's great. I mean, you see a lot less of that now. I feel like I can't think the last time someone in like a mass communication forum slipped into Latin that I've seen lately. Maybe someone can let me know. But that's a great little snob signal there. And also it's Latin. It makes it seem more profound. If you go, no, we're animals, we dominate each other, inequality just comes from that. Who cares? Like a lot of people will be like, ugh, can we have more from civilization? We go, oh, mutatis mutandum. People go, oh, well, I didn't know it was in the Bible,
Yes, exactly. Yeah, no, it's also kind of incredible, right? So that I think in the last little bit, we heard Buckley say, all right, the New Deal's bad, fair enough. That's what you'd expect him to say, although it is maybe worth reflecting for a moment on everything that's included in that, right? Like, Social Security.
Security, huge amount of stuff that's fundamental to the left, of course, like the National Labor Relations Act and stuff, for all its flaws, at least it does, recognition to locals. Before it was gutted by Taft-Hartley, there was real potential there. I always think of too, like, I don't know if this is where Galbraith is going. I don't think it is, but like there is like an enormous amount of New Deal stuff that's just hyper conservative because it's like market enabling, like a lot of those, governmental public goods do. It like provides a foundation for the rest of the society, and for us that means the market economy. So I think of shit like the SEC, which comes from this era. And that's why firms like publicly traded firms have to file their prospectuses and their regular reports, like their 10Ks and shit, which are a big deal if you're an anti-corporate research nut like me, but also like are mainly used by investors and executives and managers to see if a company is actually running a business model they'd want to invest in, rather than the old days where it's snake oil and I'm well capitalized, you'll see your money again. Like very conservative, like investment clarity oriented public bureaucracy that like helps conservative goals. But yeah, the breadth of the New Deal like is pretty stupendous, and that's why you got to go after stuff like, oh, telling us how much we could charge for ketchup, because it did control prices for agricultural commodities like friggin' tomatoes. But you don't want to say, well, tomatoes for our fighting boys to fight fascism overseas. She says, oh, telling us how much I could pay for my my Bloody Mary, tomato. Oh, you government bureaucrats. He says worse than George, the friggin' the monarchy. Like, that's just Bill. But I do enjoy so far. The commenter said this is very dry, and that's probably likely the case to be the case. But I will say, like, the Galbraith's confidence, like he is a match for Buckley and is leaned back. Let's debate this confidence. I feel we have two very matched characters in that way.
Yeah. I mean, Galbraith is clearly the same kind of entity that Buckley is, right? The
Ivy League.
Yeah, exactly. Ivy League education, wears a suit, has this kind of drawl that, I think the commentator was saying if they were any drier, they'd be martinis, which definitely sums up something about the style here. And, and it goes with what I said when I was posting this debate, which is, we like to do a mixture here of, higher and lower brow and, more contemporary and historical debates. And we did recently spend 2 Thursdays watching Alex Jones scream at Destiny. So I think we're about ready to drink some dry martinis.
Absolutely, yeah. Like the commenter said, it's dry martinis, which I think was the craft services table for this event, was just martini bar. But that is, I would just agree with all that, and we'll let these gentlemen get into it in a very intense manner. But after Alex Jones, this is exactly what's called for. I will just say finally that every time, like, I know what's going on. I've watched Destiny debates with you in the past, but like every time someone says Alex Jones yelling at Destiny or arguing with Destiny, I'm like, wow, he really does. Oh no, they mean the guy on YouTube. That's right. It's just impossible. My brain just will not hear it except in the funny way.
Yeah, he's not just screaming at Destiny as an abstraction. Although, it's very easy to imagine him doing that. Also, that's sort of that's like the mass marketed version of a conservative, somebody who stands athwart history, saying stop. Right? It's the Alex Jones is the guy who takes off his shirt and starts screaming at Destiny. But so the other okay, so New Deal bad.
Yeah.
Would really like to know, so Social Security bad, basic financial regulation bad, also progressive taxation bad.
That's clearly bad.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a point to Galbraith for that line about how Buckley is talking about people's savings accounts. Like, I don't believe that
savings accounts are how they got rich. That's what he said. Boy, that is very accurate. If you look at the DuPonts, it's, they never had much money coming in, but they always put their penny in the little savings purse. That's how, they had a giant chemical empire, and it was about equity in the productive economy that controls everything. Oh, yeah. I think Bill may have misled us there slightly.
Yeah, even with the much less regressive tax code we had in 1981, I don't think you could make it to the 70% bracket by squirreling away all of your pennies in your savings account.
It goes to show, like, from the Gilded Age to today, like, there is no ruling class defense of itself than to say, but I'm just like you. I have my lunch pail and enjoy a NASCAR event, and I save my $10 a week. Like, so the whole affectation is I don't come from wealth and a New England dynastic, wealthy family in banking and commerce and other industries. Like, we're all just pinching our little pennies here in the Galbraith and, Buckley legacies. It's the oldest right-wing cosplay there is, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that was probably Galbraith's best line so far, was the thing about people in the 70% tax bracket not being great users of savings account.
Could not have been better. Yeah, that's great.
And I I also liked him needling him about, whether it would have been pro George III. Reminds me of something that I saw on Twitter a couple days ago, where I think it was after the announcement about Charles having cancer, and this guy. So the original tweet is, the King of England does not have cancer. The last King of England fell in battle with people in 1066.
Goddamn French!
There's been no King of England since that, only the unbearable weight of the Norman yoke.
Oh my God, that's so great. Thank you, sir or madam. I can't make that out. That's great. That's very funny.
And so the person quote tweeted, "Now that's what I call a reactionary. You think all was sweet up until the execution of Charles I? Why don't you just dye your hair blue and declare your pronouns, you limp pansy?" Yeah, no, that's a real reactionary right there. That's like everything. I mean, forget not accepting the New Deal. You don't accept 1066.
Yeah, I don't accept. Yeah, we don't accept parliaments and stuff. Yeah, it's.
Exactly.
Oh my God. Who let all these women in here? What's even going on?
Yes.
Oh my God.
So last thing I want to say is I thought it was interesting, kind of going back to the point about why even somebody like Sorab, in his own, eccentric way, right, finds something to like about Galbraith. You can kind of see that in this conversation, because Galbraith actually is trying at one point in what we watched to appeal to Buckley as a conservative. It's like, look, don't you like social stability? Do you think that if we just let people starve to death in the street, we're going to have a lot of social stability?
Yeah, exactly. Then that should appeal. It's like that famous Teddy Roosevelt thing that supposedly he yelled in the face of J.P. Morgan at some early 20th century New York event, saying, if you don't let us impose antitrust, and some, mild labor reforms, he said, those who come after us will bring you to ruin. Like, we liberals are the wall of defense between, the wild masses and their desire for equality, and you, the men of property. Like, you should be supporting our creation of an orderly system where only a little of your wealth can be taken away and you can kind of get it back later. I think that goes deeper than just his little cute remark. That is interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's go back to it.
Use his talents to prefer industry to sloth. But there has got to be a reason for doing so. And the extent that you procrastinize society, you are precisely telling people that they cannot enjoy the fruits of their own talent. It would be like telling you that you couldn't write any books, which, come to think of it, is not a bad idea. Maybe we should have a quota on books.
You go farther than I would. You would then wipe out all inheritance in order that everybody start even.
No, because one of the motivations for people's work is to make life easier for their children.
Okay,
it's an extremely important motivation.
Oh, children,
it's a principal aspect of altruism.
Children and grandchildren, I want where you say you would have all grandchildren start fresh, rather than have them have the unearned advantage of some ancient grandparent. I would not go that far, Bill.
I'll make a deal with you. I'll tell you what I want to say. I'll save you the problem of telling me what I say.
But I merely go on to accept the simple logic of your positions.
Well, the logic of my position is that a society is not a tranquil society in which there are artificial impediments to individual advancement. If one were to say, for instance, there are 6% Jews in America, and therefore only 6% people can go to Harvard, I would consider that an artificial impediment and a source of dissatisfaction with which I would be in sympathy. I take it you would not.
You're struggling very hard to find some position with which I would agree, but I agree with that. I see. But have you reflected, Bill?
Well, if you agree with that, then you have to deny, for instance, affirmative action.
Have you reflected, Bill, how far you went from 70% taxation in order to get something where your position was sort of solid and sane?
No, I'm very much opposed to 70% taxation. I'm in favor of 25% maximum tax, as is Milton Friedman, from whom you once said in a conversation with me, and perhaps publicly, was the most important social innovator of our time.
Yes, because there is something on which Friedman and I have basically agreed, which is that the most important source of freedom in our society, or at least one of the most important, one I value, I think even you value, is having some money to spend. and that if you have a basic income of the sort that was advocated by Milton Friedman and George McGovern and Richard Nixon, Friedman called it the negative income tax, that this is a very important contribution to freedom. And let me ask you this, Bill, did you support the Friedman on the negative income tax?
No, I would support him only if it were passed in circumstances which would make it absolutely poisonous to you, i.e. as a substitute for those 128 other measures that you also endorse so heartily. And Milton Friedman himself did not support the FAP, and not uninterestingly, its principal architect, Senator Moynihan, has since renounced it on the grounds that empirical studies show that it hurts rather than helps. But your studies in redistribution should have led you, while you were in India, to advocate what, a minimum wage of $5 an hour?
Certainly
isn't
not.
That the way to do it?
No.
Are you turning your back on a minimum wage?
My economics, unlike yours, involves a constant adaptation to the contemporary scene.
And the contemporary scene is inflationary.
And the contemporary scene, as one finds it in India, I think I could almost persuade you, Bill, that the contemporary scene in India is different from that of the United States. And,
yes.
And I would suppose, there was a certain weakness in your polemical style in having to go to India in order to find a proposition to refute my manifest common sense.
Well, of course, your manifest common sense led you to despair in your book about India over the endemic poverty, which, not surprisingly, continues to obtain in a country that is explicitly socialist.
No.
What?
I must correct you on that. India combines certain overtures to socialist rhetoric with some of the most rapacious capitalists to be found anywhere in the world. After all, it is a society of 70% small farmers who have no disposition to socialism whatever. You mustn't argue with me on India.
Why do they elect socialists?
I don't. You made a polemical mistake in going to India, because I know so much more about India than you do, even though you know more about you know more about the technique
I have the disadvantage of having read your book on India, in which you confess your utter despair in confronting some of the problems.
There is a question. There are times when, I don't want to say unlike you, I retreat into realism. And the poverty of India is one great realistic fact. But it has nothing, I promise you, Bill, nothing to do with ideology. It has an enormous amount to do with the concentration of vast millions of people on very limited primitive land resources, and that is the cause of poverty.
What's the cause of wealth in Japan? Because everything else is the same that you just said.
Yeah,
lots of people with very little land.
I think there's no simple answer, but certainly on a large
acceptable answer.
There's a large investment in producing one of the most diligent, literate, well-educated people in the world, all by social action. Had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Are you aware that there's no 70% tax rate in Japan?
No,
are you aware that there's no capital gain tax whatsoever?
I think the tax rate in Japan only is up to 65% or something of that sort.
Well,
you're not going to quarrel about 5%, are you?
Well, I will quarrel about 5% unemployment, for instance. 5%. Well, if 5% is or is not,
you're changing the subject, Buckley. You're changing the subject.
5% is or is not important depending on its context. For instance, if you say 5% of all Jews are killed, then that would be a very great figure. If you say 5% increase in the price of Coca-Cola tomorrow, that would not be a great figure. But the fact of the matter is, we have inflation.
This seems like a nice point to pause on, because there's really no pretense there that he was engaging with Galbraith's actual point on that last part. Oh, you're muted, Rob.
Sorry about that. Yeah. How about this other country that has numbers favorable for my argument? And that's just so bizarre. It's just like, what was the year on this? 1960 something. Like, Japan is still like in reconstruction.
yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's 1981, but like it's not.
Oh, that's right.
But yeah, I mean, this is like the back and forth here was Galbraith gives his take on poverty in India, and Buckley says, well, okay, but why isn't, Japan equally poor? And Buckley's proposed explanation is that the taxes aren't as high in Japan, and he says, they don't have any 70% taxation there. And Galbraith's like, yeah, I think the taxation goes up to 65%.
Yeah, and then Buckley goes directly into quibbling about the meaning of 5%, but it's 5% that just like hurt his own argument, because like it's not super material whether it's 65 or 70%. Those are ludicrously high rates, of course, from his point of view. Kind of some naked evasion here. But Buckley walked into this by just making it about some other country where, as Galbraith said, like, you don't know that much about this. That's the most professorial thing ever. You sure you want to do this? I know a lot about. I mean, if you want to. That's a very higher ed moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Buckley just goes through all of these like irrelevant rhetorical points about how 5% can be really important in some contexts. It's like, yeah, sure, but like if your claim is that India is poor because of a burden of crushing taxation, like surely you would also consider 65% to be crushing taxation. You just said a minute ago that you think it should cap out at 25, right? So that's like 40 over what you think it should be, not 45, right? Like, but that actually does not seem like a case where that should make a big difference as far as it's relevant to your argument.
Exactly. And I mean, there's just so little basic, like using Japan, which was like, 1980s, but like it's still a rebuilding country. It had to get back on its feet economically. Just, after a country's been through a recent total destruction in the last couple of decades, it's probably not like a fair case for like whatever it is you're arguing. Yeah. Any country that hosts World War II within the last 20 years is not, I think, it's barred from being used as an example.
Yeah. I mean, it's in this case, I mean, they were back on their feet by then, but like, it's not, in fact, in a perverse way, right? World War II might have actually, in a long-term way, helped, because they had to sort of redo industry from scratch. And Germany also. But yeah, but like going back, like going back to that 25% thing, is like that's also just such a bizarre thing, right? Like I can understand somebody who says, oh, taxation is theft, like any kind of taxation is wrong, or any kind of taxation that's not used to pay for the military or cops to protect our property against poor people is bad. Like I think those are abhorrent positions, but I can like understand the internal coherence of them. But like, oh, taxation is legitimate, but like 25%, that's my cutoff. Like it's like where do you pull that from?
Yeah, I mean, I just assume that those kind of moments are an artifact of Buckley, being one of the politically engaged conservatives there. Like Milton Friedman has that reputation now too. Like, oh, he said some income tax was acceptable. It should just be very low. Like that's because he was like trying to like be involved in real politics and get like, you're trying to get it brought down rather than just eliminated. You get it eliminated in the 2030s with a 7-2 right-wing Supreme Court majority. Like that'll happen eventually. We're just trying to like bargain it down rather than just being like a hyper Murray Rothbard ideologue, So I assume it's an artifact of that. It does like make him sound silly. Like, of course it's wrong. It's wrong to kill people. So only people under 15 can be killed, but that's it. It's like, well, is it really wrong or not?
Yeah. And so let me think about this. So they also, in what we watched, we also got a strange little, well, I guess it wasn't that strange, but we got a little mini debate about UBI. Yeah. Because like Buckley did this thing where he's like, oh, well, I think it should be 25%, just like Milton Friedman. And hey, you told me once you think Friedman is smart. So there. Right. And so Galbraith essentially says, okay, if we're going to play that game, right, here's a thing that Friedman and I agree on. Like, we should have universal basic income. What do you think about that? And his answer is that it's okay, well, he would be opposed to it unless it was used to replace all other forms of social spending, which is which is awesome, right? Like that you can't, if you're so like, no more Medicare or Medicaid, anymore. Like it's just, you better hope that your basic income payments are sufficient, for those insurance premiums on top of everything else.
Yeah.
Although presumably those insurance premiums aren't going to be price controlled. We don't like that. That's like the people just saying what we could charge for ketchup during the war.
Oh, medical healthcare price controls. I guess you'll be telling us how much we can charge for each little syringe or each little Band-Aid or each large cancer screen. Okay, that's probably more popular. Let's stick with the little ones because that's absurd. I'm very serious.
Yeah.
Oh, you leftists with your public planning.
Yeah. Last thing I just wanted to flag because I think Galbraith did it very well. Buckley played it off as best he could, but was Buckley saying essentially, oh well, it's like good and honorable to have a free market and to leave things to the free market because people instead of coddling people, it's like ennobling to give them the chance to prove what they're made of in market competition. And there are a few different ways you can respond to that. Like I was on the Left Reckoning day before yesterday, and I think Matt Leck brought up some libertarian podcast that Michael Brooks had been on once, where it's like the host had said something similar, and Michael said like, yeah, I like competition, but I don't think like competition's great, like basketball, right? That's like I just don't think that we should have competitions where if you lose, you starve. Like, so that's like one way of handling that. But Galbraith is doing something fun too. He's like, oh, okay, so it's bad to like coddle people by just like taking care of their needs without making them work for it. It's like ennobling to like make people prove their mettle in the market. Okay, so you're against inheritance, right? Because like inherited money means that you're depriving
those poor inheritors smothered under your nanny state inheritance.
Exactly. Like what's different?
It's not a nanny state, it's just a nanny because you actually raised them with help. It's just a literal nanny in that case.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And then a moment later, it's, well, they got that money through their hard work. What about inheritance? Oh, it's great. Well, what the fuck, Buckley? So like half the people, like those DuPonts inherit the money. So I guess they didn't get it by working. Like Buckley's so telegenic. Like he's so ready with his little rebuttals. Like they abjectly contradict themselves. Like if any two of them are heard in a row, I feel like.
And as Silver pointed out, get a little echo here. Okay, as Silver pointed out in the chat, like there are points in here where Buckley is straining so hard to find his little witty banter responses to things that he's like literally not like he's literally missing the actual sense of the words, like when Galbraith, says, I mean, it's a kind of funny way to say it, but again, that, I think people like Buckley and Galbraith communicate in ways that are different from how we might. But Galbraith says, I adjust my economic thinking to the current scene, which I take it is his way of saying, to like, in accordance with new evidence. And there was a point where Silver was quoted this. I think this is right, where Buckley's like, well, the current scene keeps on changing. It's like, yes, that's why I said I'm constantly adjusting. Like, what, like, are you actually listening to the words I'm saying? Or are you just like looking for witty responses? And in that case, it really seems like the second one.
Yeah, I'll say. And again, compared to today's right-wing interlocutors, these guys look like, Greek gods or something. But like, again, like just a thoughtful listen, you really quickly are finding, lots of like fairly naked contradictions and big fuck ups. Yeah, and Galbraith's, hitting back pretty good. Yeah, especially with that piece about competition. I like that also. The one I always reach for is when Orwell personally reviewed Fred Hayek's Road to Serfdom in the Evening Standard, whatever the hell London paper was at that time. And he says, this is from memory, you can look it up in the books. He says, to the effect of, Hayek does not see, or he will not admit, the problem with competitions is someone wins them. Like, there, I beat your firm out and I bought up your assets. Now I have your market share. And now we've got two companies or one company. Like, you always end up with some giant, all-powerful Rockefeller monopolist bastard, or Gates today. So also, like, competition, like, yeah, it's great, but it's like, in baseball, when you win, you don't like absorb the other team and now you're twice as big as the other team and you can crush them more. Like, you have to like still fight with the normal, to compete with the number of people. Like, it's not like, people just don't want to realize how much market competition is different from, like, as he said, like fun competition, or like sweet Michael Brooks. Like, he would say, like, get a ball game going. Like, that's competition. You shouldn't starve if you lose. But likewise, when you win, you get to absorb the other guy and now you're 12 feet tall. Like, it's
yeah
ways to pick apart competition when you argue with people.
Yeah, absolutely. Luke Savage wrote an article about a year ago for Jacobin called How the Right Gets George Orwell Wrong. He came on the show to talk about it. People can find that episode, but if you read this article, I think he quotes some of that Hayek review in there, and he probably has a hyperlink to it. Which is very, is very good. I'll just briefly mention before we restart, just because I kind of like to do this every time that George Orwell comes up in this sort of context. My absolute favorite thing, which is that Orwell has this famous essay called "Why I Write," and good stuff, right? Should read it. But in the most popular edition of, I think it's Animal Farm, not 1984, but it's one or the other, right?
Animal Farm's famous removed.
Yeah. Animal Farm, right? It's the Signet edition of Animal Farm, right? Millions and millions of copies. They quote this in the introduction. They quote the line from Why I Write, where the part they quote is, every serious word I've written since 1936 has been written against totalitarianism, and they end there and leave out the remainder of the sentence, which was "and for democratic socialism," which is the sort of thing that if you actually want to know what the guys are, might be relevant.
And that's a capital offense for an editor. Like, you should lose your editing off with your fingers, man. Like, that is like doing that level of misleading. That's pretty amazing. That's not much to say there.
We have a slow growth in the GNP, and we have Galbraithian economics. And I say that the reason for the first two is the third.
Well, there were various gaps there that I missed, and I don't want you to repeat it because possibly the audience got it. But I must say it was so murky that maybe it would be well to go over it again.
Well, a moment ago, I began by citing the Constitution, which gives to the House of Representatives the right to initiate all money bills, right? And I said that we had Democratic Congresses during a period when we have launched into inflation. You were so offended at the notion that you reminded me that Nixon was president, but Nixon didn't initiate the money bills.
Nixon and Ford managed to produce the most serious post-war inflation up until the present.
Ford cut inflation from 9% to 4.5% in 18 months, and your guy then tripled it.
This is
want to quarrel with that?
I had certain differences of opinion with Jimmy Carter. I would listen. We might drop the persiflage for a moment.
Mhm.
I would like to see a much stronger fiscal policy. I would like to see a much more strongly balanced budget than we have. And I react with horror. I react really with mild horror
It's going to be good.
to this conservative wave of large tax reductions, large increases in military expenditure, including the disinterring of those museum pieces called battleships, all at the same time that we are presumed that we have double-digit inflation.
Why didn't you react in horror when President Kennedy, your hero, came out for a very substantial tax reductions, especially in the higher brackets, and substantial increases because of our missile gap?
I did.
You did?
Oh, yes, I was opposed to it.
Oh, that must have been your secret book.
You must know it was well known.
Is it in your journal?
It was well known at the time. It's in my journal.
Well, do you deplore the results, which were in fact an increase in federal revenue?
I always thought we should have larger social expenditure at that time.
Yeah, but I said you deplore the fact that the people were correct who said if you tax less, you're going to end up getting more, which is what happened.
Let me put the circumstances. At the time of the Kennedy tax cuts, which I must say I opposed because I was for more social spending at that time, I thought that we had social urgencies of a very high order. The possible difference of opinion here. We had a very high level of employment. We had stable prices. We had a close hold through the guidelines on the wage price spiral. Under those circumstances, and very nearly a budget surplus. Now, if you conservatives move from that situation to one where we have a very, very high rate of inflation, a prospective very large increase in military expenditures with tight bottlenecks that will make it worse, and a big tax cut, you're reasoning by a kind of analogy that if the Democrats did this sort of thing, Bill, you would be outraged. You know that.
Well,
now you must not allow your commitment to the people you love in politics to outweigh your common sense.
No, but I accept your earlier injunction to adapt to circumstances.
I rely on you as a stalwart conservative. Well, as a fixed piece of imagery in the economic system.
As a stalwart conservative, I'm in a position to reiterate certain truths that you forgot somewhere about the time you left Ontario. And they are that you cannot have a progressive capital plant unless you have savings. We have savings of 5% per year compared to Japanese savings, compared to German savings of twice as much and Japanese savings of 3 times as much. And interestingly enough, the rates of taxation are almost exactly in inverse correlation.
No, the German tax system is about the same as ours.
So they have no capital gains at all.
Oh, but
zero.
You must, of
zero.
All the myriads of taxes.
If it's less than zero, I'll see.
All of those myriads of taxes, pick out the one. The German social expenditures and tax structure is just about as rigorous as ours, maybe slightly more so. Well, now the Japanese is much less.
In fact, there are only 2 countries in Europe that have higher taxes than we do.
And you must also bear in mind, while you and your friends are busy egregiously increasing this military budget, that one of the reasons that the Germans and the Japanese have this high rate of saving is that they have not been using their resources.
Well, if you're saying that we should put pressure on them to increase their participation in their own defense, I agree with you. And if you want to play that violin, I'll play it along with you.
The others,
you're correct.
Would you also agree with me as a fiscal conservative that we might have in this age of overkill, this age of massive potential destruction, as 2 things, as a much sharper view of our own military expenditures, and also a much stronger pressure on arms control to get these hideous weapons under control. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I would agree that we should do whatever satisfies us most reasonably, that we won't use those arms.
I detect a hedge here somehow or other.
Well, That's because I have a way of saying things with
as I
a
like
certain
to,
precision.
as I like to press an interrogator,
that keeps me
occasionally I
from
like
saying
to have
such
a yes
things
or no.
Except, as such precision as keeps me from saying such things as that Senator McGovern was going to win by a landslide. That's why sometimes I talk more slowly than you.
Look, in order to maintain credibility, I want to confess I have an unparalleled record of error in political forecasts.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever confess error?
Oh, when I make it, which is why I'm so silent. No, the fact of the matter, obviously, what we want is not to have to fight a war, which tends to happen when we have democratic administrations. And under the circumstances, we must be strong enough to keep anybody from using those weapons. This is a position, really, which is not unorthodox, and I don't think is one that has been. Are you in favor of unilateral disarmament?
No, I'm not in favor of unilateral disarmament, but I would certainly get going rapidly on the suicidal arms race.
What if the Soviet Union didn't cooperate?
The Soviets have repeatedly and consistently indicated that they're no more suicidal than we are.
Well, the trouble with that is the Soviets tell only you and William Sloane Coffin this, but they never tell it to our negotiators.
It's in the newspapers every day. You don't read the papers.
Newspapers every day. Sure. It's in the United Nations speeches also. But when we offered to throw away all of our atomic bombs and invited them to do so, also in 1946, the Baruch Plan and the Lilienthal Plan, they simply changed the subject.
That puzzles me at that time because they didn't have any at that time.
Well, they were stealing them from us at a regular rate.
I have to keep you back to information. 1946, are you saying in 1946 the Soviets had a nuclear arsenal?
I was a year off, 5%.
Beg pardon?
I was 5% off.
Oh, yeah, well.
The Baruch and the Lilienthal plans were 47, 48.
At long last, a Buckley error is admitted.
That's right.
Just want to quickly note that the Soviet Union got the bomb in 1949. So if those plans were in 47 and 48, that's also confusing.
Yeah.
So
indeed.
I don't I don't know what he's thinking about there, but it's also just I think this is what I was watching when I said that some of Buckley's sense of how the Cold War was going to, ages badly quickly after this, because this is at the beginning of the 80s, and there were these, huge arms control agreements in the 80s, and by the end of the decade, the Soviets were out of Eastern Europe, and this sort of, so this, the kind of core assumption that he's making is that those Ruskies are crazy, and they'll never do any disarmament. If they say they will, they're probably lying, and
that's right. They might sound like they're conciliatory and they want to try some trial measures to meet us halfway, but you really can never trust the Arabs. I mean Russians. I was going to say the Soviets there. That's we would never say the exact same thing about everyone we ever have a conflict with or a national interest in harming. So there's something about that sounds so familiar, but I just slip of the tongue earlier. It's unrelated. This is a great screen grab, by the way. Also, I like this. This was good. Good trigger finger there, Ben. That's like a great. That's a fine. I would use this as the thumbnail for this episode. But I would just say this just quickly, also because Buckley earlier did the kind of really lazy, mushy political economic thinking earlier. He said, "Oh, here we have inflation and low economic growth, and we have Galbraith in economics." It's like bad. It's just like so mushy and weak. Like, even you could say that better, Bill. Come on. But I would just say this, it's
and also note that he was saying he was trying to like throw in Jimmy Carter on the Galbraithian economics, and it's like, come on, man. Like that's Carter was the beginning of the neoliberal journey.
That's the secret origin of it is it didn't start with Reagan. It started with like fucking Carter and his railroad and airline deregulations. Like it was all
fucking Volcker.
That's true.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's just like being like, oh, that's the bad team. Like it shows like how politicized all this thinking and at is.
Yeah.
I would just say 25 years after this debate in 2006, a still living William F. Buckley, since at this time we have inflation and slow growth and we have Galbraith in economics. In 2006, Milton Friedman, who they were discussing, died, also at a incredibly advanced age. And Buckley, wrote in the National Review, of course, a very moving sort of eulogy of him. And he said, since the 80s, we live in the age of Friedman economically. It's like, this is in the era of the end of the New Deal. It's like, oh, this is Galbraith in economics. Well, great news, everybody. Now we have Friedman in economics in this modern period, as the late Bill Buckley said. And he, of course, died in 2007 himself. So both Friedman and Buckley died before 2008 blew their whole ideological apparatus into really, really small little pieces. Just say, like, this is the age of Friedman. Giant economic crashes all the time. Don't forget, we had one just 10 months ago with the several regional bank panics and failures. A chasm of wealth inequality that's more or less back to the Gilded Age. Galbraith said at the beginning, Reagan wants to take us back to the 19th century. And I remember people saying that about George W. Bush. The mission has been accomplished to a significant degree. Women are losing rights too, like lots of things like that. And obviously huge monopolies all across the economy, abject destruction of the environment. This is the age of Friedman, given to us by the grinning jack-o'-lantern in front of our faces right now. Yeah, that's good stuff. So if we're gonna have Galbraith, then I'm gonna put Friedman in for the modern period. So take that, Bill.
Yeah, it is a shame those guys couldn't at least make it long enough to squirm a little in 2008. I mean,
God, I know.
At least say what you will about Henry Kissinger. At least he had the decency to wait to die until he had to, until he got to see the disastrous consequences of the wars he'd supported in the Middle East. And,
yes.
And also got to live long enough to see the left win a presidential election again in Chile.
That's far better. I was going to see the loss of all his work as we start to try to decouple from China and all this work on China, but the Chile, that's far better. I love that. That's great. So yeah, at least, he had more, we had to deal with him longer, but he got to see his work become ashes in his mouth, unlike this guy. So we can thank him for that.
That's right. The plan you will remember was to.
We'll never know the full possibilities of negotiation until we negotiate.
Well, we have negotiated.
And this is something, and
we concluded a treaty. We concluded two treaties.
Strongly in favor of SALT II, and I must say that the fact that the Reagan administration is adhering to its terms is something in its favor.
Well, it is adhering to its terms as a matter of convenience, but it has made it explicit its understanding that it is not bound either by the terms of SALT II or of SALT I, which of course has lapsed.
These are legal trivialities, which I don't think that you should
throwing away 300 international ICBMs is a legal triviality. We haven't in fact done that. Now there's the Soviet Union. Under SALT II, you remember they were supposed to produce. They haven't done so.
Well,
so they're not adhering to the plans of SALT II.
In any case, I'm getting away from the trivialities. I want very much to get these negotiations underway. I want to survive. I want to have all these young people survive. And I don't think that the Soviets are instinctively, as I say, more suicidal than some of our people.
Do you consider yourself to be having made an outrageously provocative statement by saying you want to survive?
Sometimes, given some of the people that you're supporting, I really feel there is. Yes.
Who am I supporting who wants to go to war?
Oh no, Bill, I take that back. I hope that nobody in this world wants war.
Well, unhappily, I think some people do.
Because I take the position, you don't have to reverse it immediately.
Well, the people who marched into Afghanistan wanted war, didn't they?
The movement into Afghanistan, I thought, and continue to think, was a manifestation of weakness. That here was a failing Marxist regime of notable incompetence, which the Soviets, I think mistakenly, certainly, were disposed to rescue. That it wasn't a manifestation of Soviet strength, but a manifestation of the weakness of the regime which had existed there before.
Well, if Afghanistan had been, let's say, 100 times as strong as it is, the probability is that they would not have been.
If there had been a strong Marxist regime there, I agree with you, they wouldn't have moved in.
I didn't say Marxist. I said strong regime, period.
Oh, but you're not suggesting that military power is
No.
possible in Afghanistan.
I'm suggesting that you
I'm-
have exactly given the principal architecture of my own position on how to guard the peace. You say that the Soviet Union is having internal difficulties and under the circumstances is looking for soft parts of the world in which to
No,
exercise itself.
no,
I don't want to be one of those soft parts.
No, I didn't say that, and I don't think
Which we
but you-
became, we're rapidly becoming under a democratic president.
Oh, I don't think that for a moment, Bill. But there are some points where your aberrations are so vast that I can't contend with them.
Well, did you think we had a missile gap at a time that President Kennedy ran on that issue?
This, I think, was a great mistake of the Democrats at that time. The missile gap, I think, did not turn out to exist.
Was resisting Hitler a great mistake?
I'm forced to confess that that I did not at that time have a sufficient awareness of the issues and of the hardware, so that I had a useful view. But then we get back to the same tendency, Bill, which I must warn you against. I speak about economics, and you go over to the admission of Jewish students to Harvard. I speak of the need for a rational, sensible effort to get these hideous weapons under control, and I find you back with Adolf, of all things, with Adolf Hitler. Now,
well, you see, it requires a little artistry to cause you to be consistent. And that means that I have to run around with pots of paint for you to dab onto your palette in order to make a consistent position.
That metaphor.
We both want peace, but you want weakness.
That metaphor escapes me about the dabs of paint. Would you put it?
Well, I have to keep cleaning up and providing you with colors in order to come up with a coherent program.
No, but it's
You
the
start
metaphor. The metaphor I want to explain, Bill.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Well, if you have only blues and you try to paint something that's picturesque, you're going to have difficulty, right?
This still bothers me. Do you get that metaphor?
Oh, these are very imaginative people. The issue of peace is or is not related to the issue of the economy, because you began, in effect, by saying one of the reasons we're in trouble is because we're spending so much on arms, and then you went off to
No, you guided
on the
me off.
issue of the primacy of guarding the peace, with, however, dodging the question whether we should be willing to pay for the arms.
Oh no, I'm not a unilateralist, but I am for, as I say, I am for the need to recognize that, as former Ambassador Watson said yesterday at Harvard, in a brilliant speach.
Who wrote it?
Recognize the common interest that.
Did you write it?
No, I certainly didn't. I would have even more ecstatic description if I had written it, and if you had written it, I would even be aware again of the metaphors that crept in and recognized the source.
I didn't mean to get in the way of communicating the brilliance of his insight, which is that there is mutuality, a common interest, and that this is something of and the most urgent question in the world today. Well, is the most urgent question of the world served, though, by simply assuming that the Soviet Union is going to repeal its stated goals, which are, after all, the source of the misery to which you allude. The difficulties the Soviet Union is having are at least traceable in substantial part to the fact that they're devoting 15 to 16% of their gross national product to arms whose only intention is aggressive, right?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that they. I think that we deal here, Bill, with a technological trap of massive power and deep concern, where there is an innovation on our side, a matching innovation on their side, an effort to improve one side or the other, and that we've become become the victims of this technology, which, of course, in both countries is reinforced by economic and bureaucratic interest, and also the fact that in this game of horror, there are certain people who become specialists in horror, and the rest of us turn our minds away from it, hoping that it will somehow go away, that we won't have to think about anything as disastrous as this. Well, I've persuaded myself that we must think about this vision of horror, and that we must bring the largest number of people, including the largest number of people who are watching this program, into a concern for getting these negotiations back underway.
Well, I agree.
Reflecting the common interest that there is in both countries.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I also agree with a Democratic Secretary of State about whom you were once enthusiastic, less so in later years, Dean Acheson, who said that he thought that the United States ought to seek peace by dealing from situations of strength. And it is, as I understand it, the strategy of the current administration to develop those situations of strength, the purpose being to force the Soviet Union realistically to come to the bargaining table.
So if we already have the capacity of destroying them 5 or 6 times over, how much more strength do we need, Bill?
But that's
if so I want to make sure I've got Buckley's argument right here, that the Soviet Union, going into Afghanistan, was a sign that the Soviet Union is looking for, soft parts of the world to impose its will on, and that he doesn't want to be one of those. And if we could only destroy the entire world 6 or 7 times over, we're going to be easy pickings. So it's really important to develop that nuclear arsenal to the point where we can destroy the world, I don't know, 10 times over, 11 times over. Exactly, Ben.
No one respects a man who can only kill everyone alive one time.
Yeah.
That's embarrassing. Women don't respect that. You really need to be able to kill like all life and everyone's families, like many hypothetical time. Even here, like we should remember this is the early 80s. This is like the apex of the anti-nuclear movement. God bless it. And it was enough. And Galbraith kind of alludes to that. This is, I guess would have been all prior to that, but like all the very effective arms control treaties, like some of those are like the Reagan administration's work. Like it's not as much as the Reagan administration's record is black with menace and death to all of us. Like there are like bits that are favorable, partly because this was an era when you'd have hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating for, real arms control treaties with actual teeth. And, every conservative, it's like, oh, but maybe they just embrace death because they hate us wonderful Westerners so much. Like we're always the ones with the upper hand. We always have the more powerful military, hugely superior budgets and resources for all this stuff. I like that Buckley does say at one point, the Soviet Union deploys a certain percent of its entire economy to weapons production. Like, wow, imagine being that addicted to the arms economy, Bill. But that ended up being the whole Reagan strategy for ending the Cold War, was to force them to put more of their budget into the armed forces, especially, the rocket service, and have lots of little skirmishes and things harassing them around their endless land borders for their giant evil Soviet realm. That became the strategy for ending them. It's like, oh, you can't trust the Russians. They put so much money into their armed forces. If we could get them to put even more in, their country will fall apart eventually. Kind of interesting ambivalence about that strategy there.
Yeah. No, very much so. And to your point earlier, it is just remarkable how little has changed in the 43 years since this debate happened. I guess we're a few months shy of 43 years. That this is June 1981.
5%.
Yeah. 5% of something. So that like he's played all the hits, and his successors haven't stopped playing those exact same hits as the Soviet Union collapsed. The sort of most geopolitically significant piece of the former Soviet Union, the Russian Federation, doesn't even have the military capacity to invade all of the Ukraine. That you know, I believe the other big geopolitical rival, China, I think has one military base outside of China.
Yes, the Djibouti naval base. Yes, a whopping base.
Yes, one, right?
Coming in strong at one.
Exactly.
Ooh, that number can only go up, I feel.
So it's like, look, at least when Buckley was saying this shit, there were like, you know, many, many, many Soviet bases outside of the Soviet Union. Nothing like the U.S., but like, you know, it's like certainly way more formidable than anything that's existed since then. And you know, all of these Soviet ICBMs, you know, pointed at the U.S. and all of that. And it's like, you know, the fact that the U.S. is just objectively in not nearly, you know, in like objectively much more dominant position than it was in 1981 hasn't stopped them from recycling all of this shit right up to the present day. So that the you know, the Russians, the Arabs, the Soviets, whoever it is, doesn't matter. They don't want to negotiate.
Yeah.
We're just sure in advance they don't want to negotiate. You know, it's like, oh, what, you know, Hamas wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. You know, Galbraith's as the voice of mid-century common sense. It's like, well, I mean, shouldn't you at least sit down at the table and see what they'll agree to? Like, you don't know what you're going to get until you start talking. Is just dismissed, and Buckley reaches for the kind of most consistent, like the most well-used knife in the drawer of pro-war rhetoric consistently for the last like 79 years, which is, oh, I suppose you wouldn't want to fight Hitler either.
Yeah, instantaneously. It's like, what about the Soviet Union? Well, I think, oh, I guess you love Hitler. Like, what the? How did you get to that, you freak? Like, this is just, you know, come on, and do you dare to denounce things that everybody hates? Oh, you know, you're using your airtime very well with that.
Yeah,
I don't know. Like that was like, I thought that was like an odd moment. That was like oddly clumsy, I would think, for Bill. I don't know.
Yeah, you're right. That, like, honestly, you know, honestly, I called Bill William F. Buckley a supervillain earlier, but I kind of think that was beneath him.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, he would never put on like a cool, weird superhero outfit and have a funny name, like, you know, Dr. Punishment or something. You know, yeah, he was kind of a
he's like, come on, you're gonna like you're just gonna reach straight for Hitler, and like
it's cheap.
It's so cheap. The whole thing, like, it's like, I don't know. I mean, I like the fact that like everything is fucking Hitler. That like you know, Yuri Andropov's Soviet Union in 1981 was Hitler. And within about a decade, Saddam Hussein would be Hitler. And just before that, I think Manuel Noriega got to be Hitler for like 5 seconds.
He was definitely Hitler for like, you know, he had his 15 minutes of Hitler.
Yeah, everybody has 15 minutes.
Goes, you know. Yeah, you know, at least get some like Genghis Khan references or something. Like, mix it up a little. It's so stale.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I don't know. I mean, I think the whole thing about Hitler is that was a pretty exceptional situation, and that really, if you look at the whole course of human history, the number of things that are not very much like World War II are going to vastly outnumber the things that are very much like World War II.
Mathematically, it must be true.
I mean, pretty much there was just the one World War II.
Yeah. No, you're right. That's true. Yeah, I got to give you that. Yeah, you know, people, you know, get a richer totalitarian ethnic cleansing vocabulary toolkit, my God. And also, you know, I will say it's kind of like, especially it sticks out because of like, you know, everyone in the chat is just burning these guys for their elite professorial affectations and their reclining postures and their erudite knowledge. And I will say this, you know, obviously we were contrasting this one to the Alex Jones modern right-wing presentation. Like, this is very much like a faculty lounge debate feel, you know. These guys are leaning back. When the camera occasionally cuts the wide shot, you could see how long their socks are. Just like the longest socks you've seen on men. You kind of forget the mid-century American, just, you know, classic era for hosiery. But it does suggest, you know, a very professorial for this term. So when it's like that clumsy at like stands out more too. You expect him to say, "Oh, surely is this your Frederick the Great moment?" Like just a little more of a rich historical palette is what I imagined.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, I don't, I pretty much never bring up Bill Maher except to shit on him. But like there were two lines from some of the old New Rules in the early 2000s. David Feldman probably wrote them both, right? You know, he was ready for Bill Maher back then. That I always liked about Hitler comparisons. One was it's insulted to compare everything and everyone to Hitler. Hitler worked long and hard to become the symbol of evil in the world, and you're really cheapening that.
Johnny come lately misbegotten CIA asset like Noriega. Oh, he's Hitler. Like, exactly. You're cheapening Hitler's evil Super Bowl ring. Come on.
Yeah. The other one was people have to stop saying that George W. Bush is Hitler. George W. Bush is nothing like Hitler, for one thing. Hitler was a decorated frontline combat veteran.
Yeah, Hitler saw a battle. I mean, yeah, exactly. Hitler like designed his own clothes. He had like an evil dictator, just like the long game. And the most offensive is when people liken him to Trump. Like, that's the most offensive. My God.
My God. Come on.
That's like boundless evil impact on the world. Like, to hold Trump up to that
like
prodigy for darkness is just dreadful.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, the guy, like, look, say what you want about Hitler. He wrote every word of Mein Kampf.
Exactly. No ghostwriter on that shit. That was written in prison. My God. Like, that's, Hitler, love or hate him. Like, it's a like, I guess I probably hate him like most of you, I guess. Like, it's true. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, definitely most evil, head of state, really probably as long as we've had the nation state in recognizable form, but like is a at least top tier, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't have much competition. But but in a twisted way. I mean, that guy was kind of a genius. Like he had I mean, he was this incredibly charismatic kind of force of nature who remade the entire German political system around him and made a credible attempt to take over the entire world. Donald Trump couldn't even get through his morning briefings without like the people who were preparing them, like peppering them with pop culture references or like bringing them back to things that were about Trump personally to catch his attention.
Yeah, remember he said this about you. That's why Lula is important, because he referred to you in this disparaging way. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, it just goes to show how much, people take like real global evil for granted. Everyone grows up watching James Bond shit. And so like we all remember those illustrations from 2001. It's, Osama bin Laden's, he lives in caves.
Yes.
Are they underground terror bunkers from Bond villain?
Tropes?
And it's
they would show the pictures,
like secret technology.
Like they would show the pictures on CNN and shit as if like these were blueprints that had been captured, from
interceptive
something, right? That's like, it's like, no, you literally just made it up. You're like, I don't know. Here's my guess.
Yeah, and of course this lives on now, obviously, with Hamas. Today, it's like, oh, Hamas kitchen. Look at the attractive tiling. Oh, that's very nice. Oh, they're just living so large on the backs of the Gazans. Like, this is 3 rooms underground that are 1,000,000 degrees. This is not that impressive.
My favorite. Yeah, the best one was after the Al Shifa hospital, where they were like triumphantly showing off pictures and videos as the basement of it. It's like, okay, I see a sink. There's like a desk. There's a calendar that it looks like somebody circled October 7th. That could, I guess, mean something.
That's the smoking gun. I mean, I'm holding a smoking gun myself, but it's
I mean, we're actually surrounded by people literally holding smoking guns because they just shot people. But yes, that's like that, this is, clearly this is the only possible explanation of it. It's like, I mean, definitely one of the defining political moments of my young life was when I was an undergrad and Colin Powell gave his big PowerPoint presentation at the United Nations. And I remember sitting around watching it with, with other students in my college and, I mean, people, and there was just feeling this like crazy distance. It's like, come on, like everybody's watching what I'm watching here, right? Because there's like a moment in there that burned itself into my memory where Powell is reading off the transcripts from like intercepted calls in Iraq, and the call is like, oh, what about the truck? Oh, you mean the special truck? Yeah, that truck. And it's like, well, clearly a reference to mobile chemical weapons labs. Like, what the fuck did they say mobile chemical weapons lab? They said the special truck.
Oh my God. Oh my God. That's like, I don't remember that bit. That's great. Like, oh, a special truck. What could possibly be special about it? Probably contains active anthrax cultures. I can't think of anything else.
Right. And like,
it was like the fucking one that had 4-wheel drive too. Like, it was special in like some really basic way.
Yeah, but it really got people in Iraq. Yeah, it's like, yeah. I mean, this is also just like on a common sense level. It's like, wait a second, you can do chemical weapons lab in a moving vehicle.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's.
I don't think where the roads hadn't been bombed out. That sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, indeed. And I have a biology degree personally. I spent about 2 years just doing chemistry in the course of that. When you go into like a lab with like real, like, commercial or industrial grade chemicals that are present, one thing you don't see is signs saying jiggle everything when you want to. Like you're driving down the road, like, how's that reaction going? Oh.
Yeah, better not make a sudden stop.
Yeah, they don't say like jiggle these around, let them splash a lot. Like, you don't see signs saying it's fun to splash in the slip and slide area in the chemical lab. You don't see those things. I'm not sure. Special truck. Fucking Powell should put you in a special truck.
Yeah.
That's just, that's a dreadful one. So that obviously.
I mean, it's just a,
years.
Yeah. And like, God, yeah, no, I there were so many moments like that back then. Like I remember
terrible era.
Like the 16 words, right, that British intelligence has learned that Saddam Hussein tried to buy uranium from Africa, which everybody else focused on other aspects of this, but the part I could never get over is like, why doesn't he say a country? Why is it from Africa? Like, there's so many countries in Africa.
Yeah, that's not unbelievably specific. From Africa. That's good enough for me, a serious high-level senior figure in a state. It's from Asia, you say. Oh, they make the very best weapons in Asia. Yeah, that's pretty bad. God, just trying so hard to get a relatively peace-loving country to go to war at its angriest moment. Like, that was after 9/11. That's when this country was most seeing red ever, and they still had to work so fucking hard to get the Iraq war off and just lie nonstop. Goes to show Americans have like an odd pacifist streak to them despite it all.
Yeah. Which I think also goes to the point about Reagan and the immediate context of Buckley versus Galbraith here, that that like, this is 1981, and it was very unclear how much Reagan was actually going to follow through on the more insane parts of his rhetoric, and actually, as you say, the Reagan administration left a trail of carnage and horror around many parts of the world, some parts of which, like unexploded cluster bomblets, had horrible effects decades later, e.g. 9/11, right? The support for the proto-Taliban.
His legacy lives on.
Yeah, but they decided to pull back from World War III, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah, hey, I'll give him that. Like, that's, a lot of breastfeeding super patriots today wouldn't have that much restraint. So yeah, I'll give them, no one hates that administration more than, me, like any other socialist, but I'll give them that. They were less recklessly suicidal with global extinction threatening arms than, say, the Bush administration was. Yeah, so they deserve that. Yes. So, that's the thing. When you have a debate this professorial, any odd clunky thing like a clumsy Hitler reference, like, it really strikes the ear wrong. People are really cooking us in the comments for forgetting about what we're supposed to be watching here. Shut up. We're watching.
Yeah.
We have to watch it.
Yeah, look, I'm not even going to comment on the paint metaphor. I think Galbraith was.
Yeah, what can we add?
No, I can't add anything to that. I also, I mean, I actually spent a minute trying to like piece it together in my head. It's like, wait, the dabs of paint? What? Wait, what?
It's tough improvising in front of a crowd like that, but
Yeah,
Buckley
you gotta do.
good ones in, but that was not a good one.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do some of this material in the clubs before you try to use it on your special.
Exactly. You don't try out new material on Carson, Buckley. Come on.
See, that's such an irrelevant figure. It's
If they have
terribly
a-
surprised to see somebody as sophisticated as you using it. We have enough BB bullets to destroy everybody, but that doesn't mean that our BB bullets are an effective weapon
So you think
against an international capability that can take out our IBM bases,
we come back again to these
our ICBM bases.
come back again to these ghastly metaphors. We've moved from IBMs to BB bullets. I haven't followed you, and I venture the thought that even this highly intelligent audience is going to have difficulty following.
The trouble with, if I may say so, the trouble with people who have your characteristic of thought, if I can say that about anybody other than you, is that.
Well, you can say it about me, Bill. I have a thick, harsh,
Seymour
thick
Melman came
skin.
up with a notion of overkill about 20 years ago. You people have been living off it, just as 20 years earlier somebody came up with the fact that deficit spending doesn't matter because we owe it to ourselves. Now, I say that the notion of overkill is absolutely as preposterous as to say that we have enough BB bullets to kill. We have more BB bullets than there are Russians. The fact is, can we keep them from launching an aggressive war? And the fact that we have enough megatonnage to destroy every Russian is a naive answer to my question.
I don't think so.
And you don't specialize in naive answers usually.
I would, there are an enormous number of things that of which I could be accused, but I would never concede that there was anything naive about the concept of overkill, and I would not like anybody to think so. But going back to deficits.
But it is naive.
Going back to deficits, how do you respond to an administration which is committing itself to continuing and increasing deficit financing under conditions of high inflation? Are you in favor of that?
I'm in favor of a lowered
I think
trajectory.
that's a yes or no question.
No, a yes or no question is something that you would get from somebody less bright than me.
The Reagan administration.
The answer is you can't stop inflation dead by any means that anybody would tolerate, any more than you can stop crime by executing double parkers. The answer is you've got to lower the trajectory of inflation. And it's not going to go to zero, and you know it's not going to go to zero, and there isn't anything we could do that you would tolerate that would make it go to zero between now and Thanksgiving. So I want to go down this way, and one way for it to go down is to cause people's marginal tax rates to go down in order to make it profitable for the per capita income to increase. This would yield higher revenues and give us precisely the situation that President Kennedy quite correctly anticipated in '63.
Strikes me as an elaborate, rather eloquent, but on the whole unpersuasive evasion.
Why?
Well, let me put the question back to you. We are going to have an increase in the deficit. We're going to have a reduction in taxes, which contributes to that increase in the deficit.
I don't think we will have an increase in deficit.
Where did you get that idea?
Well, from my reading.
I think you're going to have to read more carefully.
Well, perhaps. To be sure,
would you
I have had to rely on the statistics issued by the Democratic administration.
Would you?
They predicted first 0, then 16, then 61. It's going to be 81. I think it's going to be less than 81 in fiscal 82.
Okay. Well, let me concede your point.
Okay.
Let me concede that we're going to have a large, and continuing, but marginally decreasing deficit. My figures are not of that sort.
Mm-hmm.
Would you have tolerated that from a Democratic administration?
It would depend completely on surrounding circumstances. I think, for instance, the deficit is not extremely important if the percentage of the public sector spending is going down. For instance, if we spent a total of $100 million a year and we had a deficit of $100 million a year, I wouldn't be upset.
Don't you find yourself struggling a little bit to maintain your love for Ronald Reagan?
No, I think he's very lovable.
And you find yourself forgiving him his economics in order to maintain your affection?
No. The only quarrel I have with Reagan is that he hasn't gone far enough. He's going in the right direction, but he hasn't gone far enough. He should come out for an elimination of capital gains tax right away. He should come out for letting people who invest their money in savings get the dividends from those savings without paying a tax on them. He should come out against double taxation. As a matter of fact, he should come out for a lot of the things that Lester Thoreau
Have you
in the book that you consider the most exciting economic book published last year?
You're diverting the discussion again from my question. Have you encountered the so-called horse and sparrow theory of economics?
Sparrow, Kenneth Sparrow, sure.
Beg pardon?
Kenneth Sparrow?
No, the horse and sparrow theory.
Oh, no.
Well, you've just given an eloquent statement of it, and I invite your agreement. It is, if you feed enough oats to the horses, there will be some left over on the road for the sparrows. Seems to me that this is the kind of metaphor which has a rich meaning as compared with those of yours of the BB bullets.
Well, since this is metaphor explanation time, I invite you to elongate that one.
Well, my basic point would be that one way or another, one has to find in this way some moral excuse for reducing taxes on the affluent, and that on the whole, yours is about as persuasive as any. But the fact is that people who pay high taxes would like to have the money to spend, not to save necessarily.
Yes, you wrote a piece about that.
And that
that's true.
And that this should be admitted.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the people who want civil liberties ought to admit that they want civil liberties because they want to use them.
They're rather well.
I don't suspect anybody who says I'm in favor of civil liberties like Ari and I are of saying, you want to make a living off pornography. I don't suspect anybody who says I want clean air to say, well, he's really an asthmatic. He just wants clean air because that's his only interest. I assume that people who are in favor of lightening the tax load are in favor of lightening the tax load because they would prefer to spend that amount of money the way they want to rather than the way the government wants to.
What you're saying, Bill, is that you're in favor of the same kind of massive obfuscation with which you respond to some of my rather simple questions. Now let me be precise. You're saying that while well-to-do people in the 50% bracket and then unearned income going up to the 70% bracket do not like to pay taxes, would like to have the money to spend, they must produce some deeply moral obfuscation. Such as the fact that they're going to they need the incentives.
Why is it an obfuscation?
That they're not working and they need to be encouraged to work harder.
Why is it an obfuscation for somebody who hits the 50% bracket at $30,000 to say, I would like to save enough money to be able to send my children to school? Or he might say, I want to take a world cruise.
I'm prepared. I don't care. I'm prepared to that. I'm prepared to.
I don't care. I mean, I think that one of the things that we ought to respect in one another is your right to use civil liberties to write the kind of books you want to write. And you ought to respect my right to earn money in order to spend it the way I want to spend it.
We get over to civil,
including buying your books.
We get over to civil liberties as we got back to Hitler, as we got to those minority and Jewish students.
Sure, because I despair of anything less than eschatological imagery shaking you out of your trance.
Couldn't we stay with the subject?
The subject is somebody suspect who says, I want lesser taxes, and says also lesser taxes are going to benefit the economy. I say no more so than somebody who says, I want civil liberties because civil liberties is going to enrich the culture.
I don't really have any objection to that.
Even though it can be abused.
That's all right. I don't have an objection to that. What I object to or slightly amuses me is the person who says, well, of course, I'm in these high brackets. And I need a tax reduction in order to stir me to greater effort, in order to cause me to to have the incentives which will make me work
Well,
harder.
I think it's very often
Now,
true.
would you?
I think it's very often true because a lot of people invest in tax shelters, and those tax shelters are often as unproductive as buying antiques. Now, if somebody is the biggest antique collector in the whole world because he finds that putting his money into a savings account or into equities simply results in 70% of it being taken by Uncle Sam, and he says, I will stop buying antiques and do that other stuff, I think he's speaking very convincingly, and I'm not sore at him.
Yeah. So the thing that I mean overall, I think that Galbraith has been really on his game throughout this in like pushing back in all the right places. They one of very few exceptions. I mean, okay, earlier with the thing about Afghanistan. I think there might have been one missed opportunity to bring out analogies about places where the United States might have swept in to save unpopular regimes and ended up committing lots of troops, etc. And that might have been interesting to explore, but that's a relatively minor one. The bigger one here is that Buckley just did like a whopper of an analogy that should really be unpacked a little bit. Maybe we'll do this to wrap up the main show and go to the post game to watch the last 20 minutes. But that wanting lower taxes for rich people is like wanting civil liberties protections. That just like we don't say, oh, hey, none of my business what you use your free speech to advocate, right? I still want free speech for everybody in exactly the same way. It doesn't matter what they're going to spend it on. We should still support the tax breaks for rich people.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. That avenue is still paying dividends. I mean, that is the whole legal argument for deregulating campaign finance. That money is speech, So, yeah, Buckley's drawing that analogy, and it has that superficial appeal. It's what you do. Well, what about what you do with your money? I mean, shouldn't that be similar? Why are you taxing me? Oh my God, and for nothing, I'm sure. Pretty. That's an obfuscation that the rights had a lot of success with, and that's still going strong, I guess. Pretty weak sauce, though. Wealth, doesn't have a limit to its growth. And if I end up being Rockefeller and I control all the access to oil and gas in the Western Hemisphere, I mean, that does begin perhaps to impinge on people's, dare I say, a negative freedom and their ability to live their lives under, some energy tyrants. Just papering over that giant difference between equality, people's ability to speak, in which, broadly speaking, people have equality, and people's ability to retain money and use it for whatever they want. I want to use my money to collect antiques. I used my money to overthrow a small government in the developing world. Oh, that's great. Metaphor really does struggle here. And Galbraith keeps going after Buckley over his metaphors, and, I enjoy that. But it is like a little bit of a, here I feel there is a little too much of the, I don't know the word I want here. It's a little bit of a cute faculty kind of, but your imagery here, it's trite and shallow. I wouldn't mind Galbraith saying, look, asshole, these paper thin metaphors aren't going to let you skate around the fact that no one wants your agenda, and we only have it because Reagan charmed his way into the White House after high inflation.
Yeah. And I mean, on the free, I think the part of your point just now that's worth drawing out is that a really important difference between free speech and freedom to hold on to all of the money in your bank account is that it's not wrong to say, and Galbraith even kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the discussion, that look, there are lots of there's a strong sense in which you're more free if you have money, right? That there are things that you will be prevented from doing if unless you can pay for them, and so so having money is freeing. But a really important difference between free speech and freedom to keep every cent in your bank account is that when you say like, oh, how much of each kind of freedom should people be allowed? In the case of free speech, you can more or less say all of it, right? Like that there's like, there's libel and incitement and whatnot, right? They're the sort of common sense exceptions that are,
nice, clear lines everyone understands.
Yeah, exactly. But like more or less, right, with like a few caveats like that, right? Say, yeah, just let everybody say what they want, right?
Kind of
So,
an absolutist, yeah.
Yeah, so you can have this like pretty absolutist line that's coherent. There's no way to be equivalently absolutist about access to scarce resources, because if some people have more access to scarce resources, other people then have less.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's a really important disanalogy between these two subjects. If you have if we were going to people are paid a tax that pays for Medicaid, right? Then like we do actually have to choose between whether this money is going to go towards the Medicaid recipient or the person who's being taxed to pay for it. And they can't both have all of that money, right? Like that's, like only one of them can have it. And, there's like, just in general, I mean, even if you're like an MMT person, I mean, there are limits to like the actual objective resources being commanded in any economy. Not everybody can have everything. And so now the question we need to ask is, what sort of, principles should guide who has the freedom to use different scarce resources. And, somebody, I would actually really recommend, G.A. Cohen has a paper on this called Freedom and Money. I think it's from 2001. That's very good on this and sort of draws out. Yeah,
this G.A. Cohen,
that G.A. Cohen, that the very man, and yeah, I'd really recommend this. I also wrote an article about it for Jacobin last year. It was called something like a lack of money is a lack of freedom, and and I go through the arguments in the G.A. Cohen paper and kind of try to draw out some extra conclusions. But like it's it's just like you actually have to think about it a little bit harder in this case, because everybody can have all of it is just sort of definitionally inapplicable to the distribution of scarce resources. That anything that's not unlimited, right?
The speech isn't scarce,
exactly.
Especially on the show. You can talk. Everybody can talk. You can talk all you want till you just get tired, But like property, like it's at any moment there's a finite amount, and Buckley's example character is able to go antiquing in part because there's poor people in the South who don't get anything like their fair share, and so we're able to have lots of fun luxuries and little fun lifestyles, and eventually, 40 years of wealth concentration after this interview, we get, celebrities and billionaires with private jets that are individually blasting so much emissions out. It's amazing how divergent that is from speech. We still have speech equality, in that basic level.
Yeah, in a few cases, not just private jets, but private spaceships.
Yes, it's space tourism, even better.
Yeah. So, like it just, who are you to say what they're going to do with their money? It's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe like if we have to make decisions about who should get access to finite resources, whether all their material needs have already been met, that might be relevant, whether there are preventable forms of suffering that could be prevented, whether, like diminishing marginal utility is a thing, an extra $10 means a lot more if you don't quite have enough in your bank account to make rent than it does if that's added to a pile that already has $1 billion in it. Like, these all seem like relevant considerations. And so, I think I think the free speech analogy is pretty bad. And it's like it's a good sign of like what Buckley is doing, that he just kind of slides that in there.
It's true, yeah. And to this day, when you argue with conservatives or libertarians, you'll often say, like, well, who are you? Who are you leftists to decide what I can do with my money and how many empty mansions I decide to collect? That's my decision. Like, who am I? Who am I? I'm a guy who's watching my kid die of asthma while I wave up at you in your private space rocket. That's who. I mean, I'm someone who's watching the naked outrage of ludicrously lopsided wealth distributions. That is whom I am. That's one that annoys me too.
Yep. All right. We're going to go to the post game for patrons. If you are a patron, you should already have a link in email, or if you don't see an email, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis at the same location. You'll be happy to know if you're not a patron, today is the day you can fix that. And who am I to tell you what to do with your $5? But if you do spend it on this, you get access to post games every Monday and Thursday night, Discord server. Sometimes you get advanced access to things. Most importantly, though, these are all just ways of saying thank you. The core thing is that if you like what we're doing here, you want to support it, then this is a really good way to do that. Get our all of our love and gratitude for helping to keep it going. But we are going to go to the post game to watch the last 20 minutes of this, so that should start in just a minute. I will see some of you there. Left is best.